Computer hardware. These are the tangible components of a computer system, just as you've seen. And as this topic suggests, we are going to talk about the computer hardware. Now, a computer hardware refers to a physical component of a computer system that we can see, we can touch, and feel. These tangible devices, they form the foundation of our computer or computing system or computing experience. So when you are interacting with the computer system, you will always interact with the hardware. Now, what is a computer hardware? Just as we have said, what do you think is the simplest way to define a computer hardware? Good. The definition of a computer hardware is that they are the physical components of a computer system that we can see, touch, or feel. Another name for computer hardware, or an alternative name, is that they are the tangible devices in a computing environment. So what are the importance of a computer hardware? Kindly take a moment and do the following question. Thank you so much. The computer hardware has an importance, and that importance is that they form the physical infrastructure that enable the computing operation. I will give an example. When you have a robot is just an object that performs some automatic task that has been created by human being. So for you to be able to solve this task, you need to have a robot do it for you. But how does the robot do it? It is given instruction, and these instructions are the ones that makes it perform a given task. And when it is going to perform this task, one, the instructions that are given in the form of a program, and the program are going to interact with the computer hardware itself, with the hardware, the robot hardware, that physical component, so that it can perform a given operation. Now, what is that? What's a visual display unit? It is the monitor. Some people call it the screen. So that's an example of a visual display unit. A visual display unit, it will help us to display information or to output information that we can see but we cannot touch. This kind of information is called a computer output, that is in a form of soft copy output. Soft copy output means that we can only see it but we cannot touch it. So like whatever is in that screen, can you touch it? You cannot touch it. You cannot grab it with your hand, but you can only see it. So that's a form of an output, and mostly it is done through the visual display unit. That's why we say visual for what we can see. Display is what it is presented, and the unit is the entire system that performs the visual representation. Now, the monitor is the main output device of a computer system. It is commonly known as the visual display unit, just as the name suggests. The visual display unit will display information that has been processed by the computer. Remember the definition of the term computer as we begin. We say that computer is an electronic device that will always process data to give out an output, and that output is information. So the work of the visual display unit is to display visual information. Visual meaning that information that we can see. Now there's another form of output and it is done using a given hardware, and this hardware is called the printing device. So what are the functions of a printing device? They are used to print out information on a piece of paper. Now, this is also another form of an output, and this output, it is classified as the hard copy output. Why is it called the hard copy output? It is called the hard copy output because it contains information that we can see, we can touch, and we can feel. Just as the name suggests, hardware. Now this one is hard copy output. So we get the type of output that we can see, that we can touch, and we can see, we can feel. For example, when you print something on a paper, a magazine, a plotter, a poster, and many other forms of output. So they create a physical copy of the digital document. That is the function of an output, a hard copy output from a printer. Types of printers that you need to know. We have the inkjet printer. Inkjet printer will always use ink, liquid ink, to print on a piece of paper. We also have what we call the laser printer. The laser printer will always use light technology to hit the ink and print on a piece of paper. And lastly, we have what we call the thermal printer. An example of a thermal printer is this one that you see on the picture here. The thermal printer will help us to print on a piece of paper by heating wax on the drum that is rolling within the printer. That drum will be heated so that any wax that lands on the drum and the drum contains the information that's on the print head, it will heat and print it on a piece of paper. Next, what are we seeing there in the picture? Which device can you identify in the picture? What is the category of that device? Where can we categorize that device in terms of hardware? Where can we categorize it in terms of computer hardware? Wonderful. It is a storage device. A storage device, for example, a hard disk, it is the primary storage with which we store information in a high capacity so that we can retrieve it later. For example, we can store an operating system and other files in a computer hard drive or a hard disk. The second type of a storage device is known as the flash drive. Some people call it USB. In full, it is called Universal Serial Bus Drive. The Universal Serial Bus Drive or the flash drive will help us to store information, and that information is always kept portable, meaning that we can transfer that information from one device to another. The last type of a storage device is what we call the optical disc. Optical discs are the type of discs that use light technology to read and write on the disc. They will also always include CD drive, DVD drives, and the Blu-ray disc for data storage. Now, another type of a hardware is what we call the input device. The input devices. I want you to take a moment and categorize the types of input device. What do you see in the picture? What do you see in the picture? And what do you see in the last picture? Kindly outline what you've seen on the picture. Wonderful. The first one is a keyboard. A keyboard is an input device that we use to enter data into a computer by pressing the buttons on the keyboard, which will help us to ensure we input the data or we enter data into the computer. The next type of input device is what we call a mouse. A mouse will help us to input data or to give the computer instruction by pointing and clicking on various items within the computer. There are other types of input devices. One of them include what you call the touch screen on this touchpad. Another one is what you call the stylus. We have the stylus pen here, and many more that you can research about. Now, keyboard is the primary input device for typing text and command into the computer. The pointing devices that include mouse and many others, they will always help us to control the cursor movement on the screen. And lastly, these other types of devices that include the trackpad, stylus, scanners and microphone will also help us to input data into the computer in various ways. So when we say the trackpad will always be found on a computer device which is called the laptop. And then the stylus will always be found where we are doing very serious artistic drawing or engineering activities. We also have the scanners. The scanners will help us to capture the images within our environment and convert them into a soft copy format. And lastly, the microphone will help us to enter the data through the voice technology into the computer. Hardware connectivity. How do we perform hardware connectivity? Now check this. We have the first hardware, which is called the input device. Input devices will always be connected to what we call the output, the computer system. Now, what are the functions of the input device? The input devices will help us to send data and enter commands into the processing unit. Now, the processing unit, which is the immediate neighbor of the input devices, will always receive data from the input devices, and it is the brain of the computer that processes the instructions that has been entered using the input devices. Another close neighbor to the processing unit is what we call the output devices. The output devices will aid in displaying or printing the processed information. Lastly, we have the storage devices. The storage devices will help us in saving and retrieving of data as needed when performing and computing operation. Now, what do you see happening on that picture? And why do you think that one is happening? Thank you. Now, what is happening is what we call computer maintenance. A computer maintenance will always involve regular cleaning. This will include removal of dust from the computer components to prevent it from overheating. The second type of maintenance is what we call software update. This is where we keep the drivers updated for optimal hardware performance. The last type of maintenance is what we call physical inspection. This is where we check for the loose connection and weared out components within the computer system. That being said, thank you, and let me see you in the next class. I wish you a blessed and enjoyable learning moment. Thank you. Bye.